Hello, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. It's finally here. It's time for me to present that review that you've all been waiting for. And we're going to get right into it because I do have a bit to say about it. Not extensively, but it's better to get going before we hit 30 minutes on an episode or anything like that. A long story short, though, if you want to know what my knee-jerk reaction is for the very, very, very long-awaited sequel to Avatar, the big hit from James Cameron that came out in 2009. 13 years later, we have the sequel, finally, Avatar, The Way of Water. My initial reactions are that it is a pretty good movie. If you are listening to this because you want to hear me say that it's the greatest movie ever and it blows other movies out of the water and it's a visual spectacle and it's incredible and I love it with all my heart, you're not going to hear that. However, you're also not going to hear me trash it and say that it's a waste of time and pointless and boring and all of that stuff. This review is going to be like most of my other reviews, which is that I'm generally pleased with what I've seen, but I have issues and flaws. The annoying thing is because it's Avatar, I've been looking around at other reviews that have come out from other reviewers, and it seems to be it's praising it as an incredible movie that everybody needs to see, or it's balls. So there's no middle ground. So I'm interested to see when the general public get a hold of this thing, the average moviegoer, how they will react to it. Because as James Cameron is very aware of and probably a little bit afraid of, consumers have changed since 2009. Interest may have waned. So I don't know if the average moviegoer is like, oh my God, Avatar, finally. Especially when they look at the 3-hour runtime. But they may go to it and also agree that it's the greatest thing since The Godfather. I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see how things change over the next couple of weeks. I'm very interested to see how it does in terms of the box office, how much money it makes, whether it crushes all opportunity. I want to see if it can make it to the top of the box office like the first Avatar. I don't think it will. I really don't. But if it does, that'll be impressive. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, getting into it, Avatar: The Way of Water, it's a sequel to Avatar. We all know what Avatar is. You have definitely seen Avatar. You may not remember it because it was so long ago, but you've seen it. I've seen many movies many, many, many times. But before I saw The Way of Water, I had to rewatch Avatar because I knew that if I go into this movie, especially with 3-hour runtime, if I'm not picking up on every reference or every continuing thread that they're building on from the first movie, I'm not going to be able to appreciate it. And that's something I will say to the film's detriment. To The Way of Water, this is a movie designed to be a sequel and designed to be a continuing story. So if you've never seen Avatar and you go to see The Way of Water, I don't think you'll enjoy it. You might be impressed by it, but you'll have no emotional investment in it. Interestingly about Avatar, for so long, everybody talked about it when it first came out in 2009 because of the whole 3D thing. And I will give credit to Avatar. Avatar is the only movie that has actively used 3D to the benefit of the movie. Every other movie afterwards just jumped on the bandwagon to be, we're in 3D. But the experience of watching Avatar in 3D, to this day I still remember it. And it was an impressive visual marvel. The way the 3D complemented the story it was telling and the visuals it was showing was truly impressive. A lot of buzz about Avatar, makes a lot of money. Everyone thinks it's going to win Best Award at the Academy Awards. And then very funnily, James Cameron's ex-wife beats him. The Hurt Locker wins that year. And then, of course, for the next 13 years, it's all been James Cameron's like, okay, well, Avatar's just the first in what could potentially be 6 Avatar films. So Avatar 2's coming. 2014, Avatar 2's coming. Then 2014 becomes 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. It just keeps getting pushed further and further back. The reasons being apparently is to allow technology to catch up to the ambitions that James Cameron has for directing this film. I believe the main thing is allowing for technology to be able to do motion capture underwater, because boy oh boy is 90% of this film underwater. So when you think about that original Avatar, you have to remind yourself and you have to wonder, do you actually like it? because Avatar impressed everybody with the 3Ds. But what I can appreciate, because I fell for it too, I thought Avatar was the greatest movie in the world. But over time, as it's been allowed to be analyzed and dissected, what Avatar comes down to really, the story itself is very derivative. It's very generic. The story they tell has been done multiple times before. And if you've seen other movies, you can see the inspirations that James Cameron's built on. Specifically things like Dances with Wolves or Pocahontas, or any of those type of stories with the evil white man settler coming to take the land from the natives. The thing is, it was hidden behind such impressive visuals and motion capture and 3D, and it was a really impressive looking movie that I don't think people noticed that. But now, when you go back to rewatch Avatar, because you can't go back and rewatch it in 3D unless you have a 3D TV, and we don't have 3D TVs. When I went back and watched it a couple nights ago, for one thing, the CG doesn't hold up as well as it used to. The way CG has evolved in the last 13 years, you can tell Avatar was made a while ago. That's not the movie's fault, but it ruins, when it takes away that thing that made Avatar such a big thing, was its visuals and its spectacle. When you take away the 3D and you're left to just focus on the story, you find yourself going, it's still good. It's still a really enjoyable, well-made story with good characters and a good story arc for Jake Sully, the main character. If you don't know what Avatar's about, basically, it's set on this planet called Pandora. All these humans have come to Pandora because they want to get this special mineral that's there called unobtainium, but it's underneath a settlement where the natives of Pandora, the Na'vi, are living. Sam Worthington plays Jake Sully, who is this disabled war veteran who's been hired to pilot an avatar body, which is basically a body built to be a Na'vi. Goes to infiltrate the place, ends up falling in love with a female played by Zoe Saldana, appreciates the customs, start to see, all right, the humans are the bad guys. But then the military takes over, led by a pretty crazy colonel called Colonel Quatrich, played by Stephen Lang. And then there's a big confrontation on who's going to essentially rule Pandora. And naturally, the Na'vi win, eject the humans from the planet, except for the nice ones. They keep them around for some reason. I don't know why the humans would want to stay on Pandora to just live when you can't breathe the atmosphere. But that's a whole other thing that we'll get into later about just throwaway characters and odd reasons to have them in the movie. But it's a very entertaining story. It's gripping. I still enjoyed rewatching it. I just think when I go back and rewatch it, I'm like, this isn't the greatest movie ever. Not by a long shot. This isn't the movie that should be at the top of the box office. So as a result, because of that, the way the movie has been analyzed and the story has kind of been shown for what it is, and the visuals aren't as good or as accessible with the 3D as it was, you get to a point now where 13 years later and finally, Avatar The Way of Water is coming out. And you have to wonder, is interest there? Is there an appeal to continue this story? Because Avatar 1 is a self-contained story. At the end of it, it doesn't allude to, oh, yep, there's more stories to tell. It perfectly wraps up Jake Sully's character arc and his story, and where he ends up at the end of the film is a perfect ending to his story. So it's not like we walked out of Avatar in 2009 and be like, what's next? What's next for Pandora? What are we going to see next? We've got to have those questions answered because we didn't have any. And then you hear about how the movie's over 3 hours long, which is a slog. I know, hypocrite, because I do love Avengers Endgame, and that's also 3 hours. But for Avengers credit, that's building on a slowly building momentum that didn't stop over 10 years, whereas Avatar has taken 13 years off. There's been no momentum building up to this point. And then you're expected to take, when you add into account the fact that movies will play a bunch of ads before the movie, although interestingly enough, the movie theater I went to did not play a single trailer before it. I don't know why. Maybe James Cameron's being a dickhead and it's like, we only focus on my movie, not any other movie. It sounds like something he'd say. By the way, I hate James Cameron. I don't know if you realized that from this review or what I've talked about earlier. I hate him as a person. As a director, I think he's very talented and very creative. As a person, he has a terrible ego. He has terrible hubris. And to be honest, I don't want movies to fail because everybody worked on them, but I think it would be a real wake-up call to him if this movie didn't make nearly as much money as he thinks it does. Basically, James Cameron, you are not the greatest thing in the world. You are certainly not the best director in the world. Stop pretending you are. Stop telling everybody how great you are and how ambitious you are and how your movie is more creative and better than anything else out there. And if you like other movies that aren't James Cameron movies, then you're a stupid head. Anyway, I'm getting off track there. So, as a result, I couldn't get anyone to come with me to see this movie. I have a usual squad of at least 2 that normally accompany me to most movies I see. In very rare occasions do I have to go to a movie by myself, and this was one of them. And I think all of those things contributed. It's the lack of interest in Avatar, the way the movie itself has faded over time, the 3-hour plus runtime, the long wait for it. It was sort of like, I got better things to do with my time. That said, the movie theater I went to was still packed. So as I said, I'm interested to see what the end results will be box office wise. Basically, Avatar: The Way of Water picks up about a couple years after the first Avatar ended. Jake Sully is living on Pandora with his wife Neytiri, I think her name is. They got themselves a nice little family consisting of either sons that had been born by them. They've adopted the daughter of Sigourney Weaver's character. Somehow, even though she died, her avatar had been impregnated. So one of the big mysteries of the movie is who fathered Sigourney Weaver's daughter. Sigourney Weaver plays her daughter in this. Wrap your mind around that. A woman in her 70s is playing a teenager, which you could say, oh, the CG means you can't really tell. But if you're aware of Sigourney Weaver, it's very unsettling when Sam Worthington is referring to her as his baby girl, and when she's actively flirting with other characters who are definitely played by teenagers or young adults in the movie. Anyway, that's a nitpick. That's nothing like that. Anyway, as you would expect, the humans come back in scorched earth mode, basically. The vibe I seemed to get was that Earth is dying. Earth's practically dead, so they've decided that Pandora will be their new home, which means they got to eradicate the settlers. Adding to that, before the Colonel met his violent end at the end of Avatar 1, he saved his memories on a disc, and they put that disc in his own avatar body. So now Colonel Quattrich is back in his avatar body with one thing in mind, and that is to get revenge on Jake Sully and his family for what they did to him. Even though he can't remember it, he wants his revenge. There's some confrontations, and basically to protect his family, Jake decides we're going to leave the forest and head out and hide with one of the water clans. It's a different type of Na'vi who have lived on the water. As such, they have a different sort of body build and a different way of doing things. So Jake's family have to adapt to that. They face a lot of prejudice and persecution, especially because they're also considered freaks because of their body biology, because Jake, even though he's in an avatar body, is in fact a human. And then we spend a lot of time hanging out in the water with James Cameron showing off that he can film underwater. There's a lot of family drama and character drama and arcs involving the sense of belonging and future and protection and all of that, which bleeds into the Colonel's story as well, because apparently the Colonel also fathered a young boy, a baby, before he died. I don't know who or why, but the baby was left behind on Pandora and essentially became the 5th unofficial member of Jake Sully's family, even though he's a human. Colonel manages to snap him up at some point in the movie, and then there's that back and forth between them, because the Colonel, for all intents and purposes, is a new being. He has the Colonel's memories, but he's a different person entirely, because he's a Na'vi avatar thing or whatever. So whether they have a father-son dynamic, whether it's good or bad, it's a direct parallel to what Jake's relationship is with his own sons and daughters. Then eventually everything will collide at the end, where there's a big old showdown between basically Jake and the Colonel and all parties involved. And unfortunately, because this is designed to be a continuing movie, meaning that there's a third movie definitely coming at the very least, many storylines are not wrapped up, but left on to be continued states, which frustrates me, but we'll get to that. So basically the movie's very good. It's not terribly made, of course. And I think it's an improvement on the first Avatar. There's still essence of more inspiration for stories rather than an actual new organic story itself. Shockingly, there's a lot of parallels with Free Willy in this movie, which I won't explain more. You'll just have to go and see the movie to understand what I mean. So the positives for The Way of Water. The very first one off the bat, obviously, is that it looks incredible. If you do go and see it in the cinemas, you'll be impressed by it. I didn't see it in 3D because I hate that whole thing. James Cameron said recently that if you haven't seen Avatar in 3D, you haven't actually seen the movie. That annoys me to no end. You make a movie with a certain way that not everybody's going to have access to see it, and then you discount all of those people's opinions because they don't have the means to watch the movie the way you intend it to. The movie should be able to watch and still be as impressive whether it's 3D or not. So I can't tell you if the 3D was just as good as the first one because I didn't see it and I don't intend to. But on its own, it does look incredible, especially once the movie moves out to the water and you spend a lot of time with Jake and his family diving around underwater, interacting with the water creatures and the water life and all of that stuff. It looks fantastic. It looks beautiful. It's very mesmerizing. The movie's very long and a lot of chunks of it is doing this sort of stuff, but you can allow it because you're sort of just going, this looks cool. This looks gorgeous. This looks beautiful. And as I said, the CG's changed a lot since 2009. So the motion capture for the Na'vi is practically flawless in this. It's on par with what we've got from like Thanos in Infinity War. Rewatching the first Avatar, there was always that Hidden Valley sort of thing with the mouths and the eyes with the Avatar characters. But with this one, they look like organic alien beings, but they don't look computer generated. They look believable, which is pretty impressive. There are a lot of moments in this film which are basically the story stops to just showcase the incredible technology and the imagery that you're showing. And as frustrating it is that the story stops to do that, it's still really impressive to see. So if it took 13 years to get to a point where we could see something like this, well done. I guess it's worth the 13-year wait. The performances are also really good, except for Sigourney Weaver. I do not like it that she's playing a teenager. I don't know why she is. There are plenty of teenagers who could play this role. I don't know why it needed to be Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney Weaver plays her old character from the first movie anyway, in visions and flashback sequences, so it's not like, oh, we needed to have a role for Sigourney Weaver to have to be in the movie. And you can tell, as believable as the CG looks, it looks like a young Na'vi girl. When Sigourney Weaver talks, it sounds like Sigourney Weaver putting on a funny voice because she wants to sound like she's a teenager. If you've ever seen that Friends episode where Joey thought he could play a teenager and then he put his hat back and his shorts up, it's basically what Sigourney Weaver's doing here. But everybody else, perfect stuff. Sam Worthington, for all intents and purposes, he is Jake Sully, and I liked his evolution from his first movie and his first character arc. They respected who he was. They didn't just change him into a Na'vi character in this. He was still the Marine jarhead. He's still, while he's a part of that world, he hasn't forgotten what it is to be human, and how he approaches things is still very militaristic. To a point where he's often treating his family like his own little Marine squad. Zoe Saldana, she loses herself in her role as she did last time. She's very entertaining to watch. All the children as well, except for Sigourney Weaver, all well-rounded characters with their own personalities that go on their own emotional journeys and character arcs, which for the most part are really interesting, and I'm excited to see where those actors go because they're very talented. For me, the standout performance was Stephen Lang coming back as the Colonel in the Avatar body. Rewatching Avatar, I do like the Colonel. I think he's a good villain for that movie, but he was generic military villainous bad guy, evil for the sake of evil. You can tell from this one, right from he's resurrected in his Avatar body, that things aren't going to be the same the second time around. Whether it's being in the Na'vi body, whether it's experiencing the culture, whether it's learning he has a son or trying to connect with him, there's going to be some sort of character development and evolution to him. I don't know where it's going to go. I do like that they didn't go too far that way and just suddenly started making him redeemable. He's got this pure hatred for Jake that completely overrides anything else he ever does. No matter how much ground he's made with his son, no matter how much he's learned to appreciate the flora and fauna of Pandora. He sees Jake and he sees Zoe Saldana and he sees Red, and it's all about vengeance. So I thought it was very well done. I think Stephen Lang did an incredible way of evolving the character beyond generic military colonel bad guy man. And he was my favorite part of the movie. Every time we cut away from him, I'm like, go back to the colonel. I'd like to see what's going on there, what his goals are, what's happening. And the final climax of the movie, I actually really, really, really like. When we get to the final bit where Jake and the Colonel collide in this big battle above water with the Water Clan and the military, whether they're in the Avatar bodies or they're these weird whale hunters. For some reason, Jermaine Clement's one of them, but I don't know why it had to be Jermaine Clement, because they do not utilize him in any way, but I guess maybe it's a plan for a later film. I don't know. But once that kicks off, it's a very exciting, fast-paced, no-holds-barred action extravaganza with arrows flying and boats exploding and jumping in and out of water. And adding to the fact that they're actually jumping in and out of water, it's not just all computer-generated. It's really, really entertaining stuff, and it builds to a pretty high tension bit. I will say that characters tend to disappear and reappear in that fight. When they start the fight, the Water Clan is with Jake, and then for some reason they're just not there anymore. And then someone will go, I'm going to do this, and then they disappear for 15 minutes, and then they just come back, and you don't know where they were or what they were doing. So that might take you a little bit out if you're paying attention. But for the most part, it's a really satisfying payoff to a lot of build-up and getting to that point where there's going to be this confrontation. It's all going to bubble over, and it's really entertaining stuff. So I really enjoyed that. But there are also a lot of problems I had with the film, which is why, as impressive as it is, and I think it's a really well-made movie that's better than Avatar, and, you got to appreciate the effort and drive that went into making it. There are many, many movies this year that I would rather watch, that I enjoyed more. On a rewatchability factor, I don't feel the need to rewatch this movie anytime soon, but I would happily put Puss in Boots on again tomorrow, even after I finish recording this. And these are the reasons why. One, it is too long. Over 3 hours is too long. I don't care what movie you are. If you go over that 3 hour mark, you're too far. Even Avengers Endgame, for as great as it is, and I love it to bits, it doesn't need to be 3 hours long. If it is, though, it needs to be able to balance the story to allow for that extra long runtime to be satisfactory. Avatar is over 3 hours and you feel it because the pacing is incredibly slow and the balancing between storylines is not perfect, meaning you will focus on a storyline for 10, 15 minutes and then you won't check into that storyline again for another 35 minutes because you'll focus on something else, which is jarring and it doesn't allow for a certain flow. To explain it better, I won't use Avengers Endgame as an example because I get called a hypocrite, which is fair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Middle-earth movies, specifically The Return of the King. The Return of the King is 4 hours long when you watch it on the extended edition. However, that 4 hours flies by, and the reason it flies by is because it has a continuing building momentum and well-balanced storylines that allows you to be following along with everything that's going on without A, forgetting what's happening, or B, losing interest in one particular storyline in favor of another. Whether it's Frodo and Sam heading into Mount Doom to destroy the ring, or Gandalf and Pippin defending Gondor, or Aragorn hunting for the dead soldiers to save the day, everything is happening simultaneously and it all is building momentum. So no matter who you're with or what you're focusing on, the excitement is still there. The Desolation of Smaug doesn't do that because, well, for one thing as well, it's stretching one story out over 3 movies, but it has no particular end point, and it has one particular storyline with the dwarves and then one with Gandalf. But you check in with Gandalf every 40 minutes or so. So whatever he's doing is a complete roadblock to the building momentum of the story. the thing with Avatar is that nothing is flowing together. You don't cut from the Colonel to Jake and feel like, okay, cool, this is what's happening at the same time. The Colonel's storyline is completely all over the place, and you don't get a sense of time. And then you have these moments in the movie as well where you are underwater and you're watching everybody swim with the dolphins and everything, and it's really mesmerizing and it's great. But then after a while, you're like, okay, cut 2 minutes of that, and you're under the 3-hour mark. It's knowing when, it's having the self-awareness to know, okay, yes, I'm very good at what I do. Yes, I've made some really good underwater stuff here. People will get it. I don't need to show them every single bit of it. As I said, it's the balance as well. It's the storylines that ruins the rewatchability and doesn't justify the 3-hour runtime. There's a storyline going on with Sigourney Weaver's character. There's a storyline going on with one of Jake Sully's sons and a giant whale living out in the harbor, which is very Free Willy. There's a storyline going on with Jake learning to be a father. There's a storyline with Zoe Saldana being aggressive as a mother and not accepting of new cultures. There's a storyline of a romance between a son and the daughter of the chief that they're staying with. There's a storyline of the chief's wife who isn't accepting of everybody who's come to the island. There's the Colonel's storyline. There's the Colonel's son storyline. There's the overlying fact of what the humans want with Pandora. There's a lot going on, but it's not all weaving together particularly well. You focus on something for so long, and then you move to something else, and you go back and forth, but not in a way where it's all gaining momentum or building and all of that, and you start to be overwhelmed and be a little uninterested in certain bits as well, especially with our third big problem that I have with the movie, which may not be the movie's fault, but it also kind of is, because you need to know how to do this, which is when movies are designed to be a part of franchises and go, okay, so this is our middle bit. We're going to have a third movie, definitely. So a lot of what we set up in our movie will have to continue telling in another movie, which is fine. If you are able to still self-contain the storylines to one particular movie, so there's still a satisfactory conclusion to at least what you're watching. The Way of Water has a lot of storylines going on, and more than half of it just stops because you got to come watch Avatar 3. A prime example is Sigourney Weaver's role in the movie. The daughter's whole drive is that she doesn't know who her father is or how her conception was. So we check in with that every 20 minutes or so. And then it gets to a point where she bonds with a tree or whatever. And she almost gets the answers, but it nearly kills her learning that. And then someone says to Jake, if she tries that again, she'll die. And then that's it. We do not check back in with that storyline again. I guess we're saving that storyline for the next movie. But that's very unsatisfying to set up something like that and focus on it so much and then not just have a natural conclusion to it, or at least a to be continued. It's just, we're going to stop talking about that for now. And then you have a lot of other storylines as well, which towards the end of the movie start to cap off or just cease telling because it's time for the third movie. The very last scene of the movie is basically Jake saying like, all right, we've been hiding long enough. Now is the time to fight. And I'm like, what have we been doing the last 2 movies? We have been fighting. What are we going... How... We fight some more for another 3 hours? Oh my God, I don't know. A frustrating thing about the movie as well is, as much as James Cameron says, it's always been a plan to have 6 Avatar movies or whatever, I don't believe him, because that first Avatar movie is a self-contained story. It does not hint at more stories to come. I don't mind that we're going back to Pandora and talking about more stories and all of that stuff, but the movie opens by completely wiping out how that first movie ended. Everything that they achieved in that first Avatar movie, how they defeat the humans and save the day and became a family and all of that, within the first 10 minutes, all that success completely wiped out. Which is fine, but then it makes that first movie redundant, because whatever they achieved doesn't matter from this point on, because we're just starting again. They're basically... Somebody won a chessboard game and then somebody came back and said, I want to play chess again. But before someone has a chance to reset the board, someone's just swiped all the pieces off. That's a very poor analogy. But that's really frustrating when A, you start the movie by pretty much going, that last movie doesn't count. But also, this movie isn't finished yet because it's a part 2. Comparisons again for the Middle-earth movies. The Two Towers is a middle part movie, and the overarching plot of defeating Sauron and destroying the One Ring is still there. But the themes and adventures that they go on in that movie, mainly saving the people of Rohan from the Uruk-hai and defending Helm's Deep, and Frodo building his relationship with the character of Gollum, all of that reaches either a necessary conclusion or to a natural point where it is allowed to be a to continued sort of thing. Then you have something like the Desolation of Smaug, which has the dwarves at the end fighting Smaug the dragon, and then Smaug's like, I think I'll just destroy that town over there. And then it's just cut to black, movie's done. It's like, what? Whoa, the story's not done. In my opinion, The Way of Water does the same thing here. It doesn't naturally conclude anything that it's building on. It just gets to a point where the storyline is very exciting and then just goes, stop. I don't know. So that sort of stuff frustrates me because it's that hubris of the director. It's the person behind the camera who's all about, I want to make lots of movies. I want to make lots of money at the expense of just making a self-contained movie. Look, overall, I might be in the minority here, but I think it's a very good movie. I really enjoyed it, but I don't think it's impressively. I don't think it's a flawless, fantastic movie. It has a lot of issues, and those issues are big. As a result, the movie only gets all right, I will give it a 7.5 out of 10. It's the first time I've ever given something a half. I don't want to give it an 8 because I didn't enjoy it that much for it to be an 8. I don't want to give it a 7 because I have to give it props for some of the things it's achieved and also that incredible climax at the end of the movie, even though it doesn't have a satisfactory conclusion. So I'll give it a 0.5, which means it's still pretty good. I do recommend it. I recommend you rewatch Avatar. Otherwise, if you're going to sit through an over 3-hour movie slog, you want to make sure you have the information relevant to enjoy the movie. It may scrape the top 10 for me, but if it does, it's just going to be on the number 10 spot. I certainly won't get any higher in that. I have no desire to rewatch it anytime soon. I'm not excited for the next Avatar because that's another flaw as well. You set these movies up with these cliffhangers to be like, the story will continue. But in everybody's mind is the fact that the last movie was 13 years ago, and I'm not confident when the next one will be. So any sort of excitement or intrigue that I do have for a future movie, I will definitely not be able to hold on to it if I have to wait another 13 years. So we'll see. 7.5, I think. Very good movie. Flawless in its spectacle and execution of motion capture and underwater scenes, visually stunning, some really fantastic character performances minus Sigourney Weaver, a really good final climax that I really enjoyed, but it's too long, the storylines are not evenly balanced, and it suffers from that problem of being a middle child movie that has no real beginning and no real end. It's just a series of events that you have to have seen something before to understand where you are, and you have to watch something after it to get the conclusions that you want to what you've seen. Which is not a movie in the end, it's just a piece of a puzzle. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. My God, this definitely went longer than I intended it to. I apologize for that, but I hope you have enjoyed this rather interesting look at Avatar: The Way of Water. As I said, I will be very interested to see what the general public, what you, the listeners, actually think of this movie rather than the reviewers who, the difference between review scores and audience scores are always pretty funny sometimes. So I'm interested to see how that goes. I'm interested to see how much money this thing makes. And I'm interested to see how James Cameron reacts. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed, and I will be back. I don't know when. I want to do a Christmas episode next week, but I'm not sure what I want to do it about, and I don't want to do it half-heartedly. So it may end up being that I'm not actually back next week, which means I wouldn't be back till after Christmas. But after Christmas will be a big episode anyway, because I'll be giving you my top 10 movies of 2022. So if there is no new Spliced In Later next week, don't be alarmed. There definitely will be another one before the end of the year, and it will be a doozy. It will be the very best, according to Spliced In Later of 2022. But until then, I love and appreciate you all. As always, it's been a treat talking to you. And I am interested. Go see Avatar: The Way of Water and let me know what you think. Maybe I'm just an idiot. You've been Spliced In Later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.